It's going to be a really cool matchup of, again, two incredible programs that represent all the excellence in college football for a long, long time.
Hello and welcome. It is always college football. It is Thursday, September 4th, and we have a lot to be excited about this week. Man, what a week we have when it comes to college football games. And I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of people that will look at this slate and say, doesn't do much for me. There's only one ranked matchup, but you are not one of those people. You are a loyal supporter to the greatest sport known to man. Why? Because you're here on our preview show and you want to hear an in the weeds preview on Illinois Duke, Baylor SMU, a handful of other games that might not necessarily have national championship implications, but guess what? You want to know about them. So I'm proud of you for being with us today, man. Thank you again for the support that you've shown the show up to this point. Thursdays are our bread and butter. You guys know this. Mondays are awesome where we do a deep dive takeaway. Wednesdays are great when we visit with a guest. Thursdays, we do the best preview show in college football because we dive deep, much deeper than that of pretty much any other show. Why do I know that? Because I listen to every other show. That's for sure. I also very much appreciate those of you that have subscribed to the podcast. Whatever podcast platform you're on, go ahead and subscribe. You can leave us a rating. You can leave us a review, whatever you want. We really appreciate the support. And for those of you that are here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube page, keep it locked in here because there'll be clip outs from this show that might be 7-8 minutes in length as opposed to an hour plus. So you might not want to hear about all the games, but you want to hear about one. Perfect. That's fine. We'll post that here at some point in the next day or two. So let's kick it off. 8 previews for you today. Deep in the weeds previews on 8 of the biggest games of the weekend. And then I'm going to give you an area of improvement for some national championship contenders before I finally give way to our giant killer segment, which is off to a nice start off of last week's first show. Let's dive in. We'll kick it off. Illinois and Duke, noon Eastern on ESPN. This game will be played in Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham, North Carolina. Two programs with some ambition coming into the season, fresh off some really nice 2024 campaigns. We'll start with the road team, the Illinois Fighting Illini, trying to sustain the run of recent success under head coach Brett Bielema. They're trying to prove that the 10-win season of 24 was just the sign of things to come. It's the first time they won 10 games since 2001, and a win on the road against a good ACC opponent, I think, would solidify their ranking and provide some legit momentum heading into what should be a very tough schedule there in the Big Ten. Duke, on the other side, fresh off a 9-4. If you look at Manny Diaz, the head coach, he's brought in a bunch of high-impact transfers. So there's some real excitement with the Blue Devils, and a win over a ranked Big Ten team would fundamentally kind of alter the narrative surrounding what Duke might be from being just another good, solid team to a legitimate factor in the ACC title race. So if nothing else, it should be really fun to watch, considering these teams combined for 97 total points in week one. Brett Bielema's style is very obvious. He wants to be physical. He's kind of a grit, physical toughness type guy. It's a very distinct identity, and they're trying to be the more physical team in this game, whereas Duke, on the other side, kind of chaos-driven, athletic. Manny Diaz's defensive style, he wants to create negative plays, tackles for loss, sacks, and then he wants to have a highly entertaining offense led by a brand new quarterback addition. More on him in just a second. We'll start with the quarterback matchup on Illinois' side with Luke Altmaier, very efficient in the opener, 17-21, 217, 3 touchdowns. Things look very good for him. He's played a lot of football. Should come as no surprise that he was able to eat against lesser competition. Then Duke's Darian Mensah, transfer from Tulane, spectacular at times in the debut. 389 yards and 3 touchdowns. He completed his final 14 attempts. That's the 6th best streak in program history and became the first Duke quarterback in 15 years to throw for over 300 in his debut. Let's get down to the questions that will decide the outcome. Question number 1, can Illinois stay on schedule and win first down? Look, the running back tandem of Fagan and Lafferty can consistently gain 4 or more yards on first down. It'll completely change things for their offensive coordinator, Barry Lunney. Like Barry Lundy does a great job. And this is a strength on strength confrontation. Now, Illinois' offensive line's veteran. They return everybody. And if they can just continue to stay on schedule, that'll be big. Illinois against Western Illinois last week, they were dominant. Went for 226 on the ground, averaged over 7 yards a carry. But on the Duke defensive line, this is a very disruptive group. They had 3 sacks and 10 tackles for loss last week. They have a difference-making defensive tackle in Aaron Hall, who had 11.5 tackles for loss last year. If their front can create pressure and get Illinois off schedule, forcing them into obvious passing situations, that's when this Duke team can really get going. Question 2, can Duke's pass rush get home? Because if you look at Illinois' protection last week against Western Illinois, there's some red flags. I mean, they kind of struggled with some consistency, and with 5 guys back, didn't think that'd be a problem. They had 3 sacks last week, kind of an alarming number when you look at who they were playing against. Their left tackle, J.C. Davis, been kind of managing some plantar fasciitis, has been in a walking boot leading up to camp. And then on the other side, the right tackle, Melvin Priestley, went down with a rolled ankle during that game. Now, Brett Bielema tells us he's likely going to be available, but still, if they're at less than 100%, that could be problematic against a really good pass rush and disruptive front for Duke. Question 3, can Illinois contain Duke's explosive passing attack? If you look at the Harvard transfer at wide receiver, Cooper Barkate, he immediately established himself as like a legitimate target for the Blue Devils. Had 5 for 117, obviously has some chemistry built up with Darian Mensah. Samir Hagens had a couple touchdowns. Andrell Anthony, who's been around football for a while. Keyshawn Brown. This is really 4 deep at wide receiver, and they can really overwhelm secondaries in the event in which they're not playing real well. And on the other side, Illinois' secondary might have a bit of a problem with corner Jaheim Clark, who's missed the season opener, kind of trying to recover from hamstring issues. So hopefully he can go. But his absence last week was certainly felt because his replacement, Caleb Patterson, he got targeted a bunch and gave up about 65 yards through the air. And this will be against much better competition. So it'll be big for Illinois to be at 100% and disguise some coverages against a veteran quarterback that can create on his own. If the secondary is not 100%, they're going to need that front 7 to be able to breathe some fire off the edge. So Gabe Jackas will need to be big. He's got to generate a lot of pursuit, generate a lot of pressure on Mensah, and explosive plays could absolutely be the biggest determining factor in the game. And then question 4, does this game come down to a special teams play? Both Duke and Illinois showed some potential in the return game last week. Illinois wide receiver Hank Beatty returned a punt 69 yards for a touchdown. Keyshawn Brown for Duke had a 78-yard punt return of his own. That's big. Is the return game going to be a role player in this one? And Illinois missed a kick last week, had it blocked. So that's something worth watching as well. Special teams might actually play a role in this game. Since 2017, the Blue Devils are 1-15 against AP-ranked opponents. The lone win came in 23 against the Clemson Tigers. I think they get their second one. I'll take Duke. The explosive firepower that they have and the disruption they can create with their defensive front gives them the victory at home in what should be a really entertaining environment for that one in Durham, North Carolina. We'll go next to the Cy-Hawk game, one of my favorite rivalries in the sport. It's Iowa at Iowa State. This game will be 12 o'clock Eastern time on Fox. Iowa State is currently a 3-point favorite. Jack Trice Stadium, great environment. It's a great rivalry that dates back to the 1800s. But what's amazing, you would think, the hostile setting that is Jack Trice Stadium, you'd think that'd be hard for the opposition, right? They can't win on the road in a rivalry game. That never happens, right? Well, the Hawkeyes have won 6 straight inside Jack Trice. That's a pretty remarkable run. And overall, the Cyclones, they're just 8-21 all time at home, which was a little mind-blowing as well. So you look at the overall history of the series. Iowa has traditionally dominated, but recent history been a lot more competitive. This is tense, low scoring. 9 of the last 13 matchups have been decided by a touchdown or less. Iowa's Kirk Ferentz been around forever, 27 years, running the Hawkeye program. you know what they're going to do? Complementary football. Iowa State's Matt Campbell, one of the best talent developers in college football, and does a great job on a week-to-week basis adjusting to what the game needs for them to be successful. Let's go to the quarterback matchup. There is an advantage here in one direction, in my opinion. Iowa's Mark Gronowski. He was brought in to kind of revitalize a passing attack that's been one of the worst for a while. And if you look at the opener, there were some struggles. They didn't have much rhythm in the passing game. He finished just 8 of 15 for 44 yards and the short touchdown. Now, we know he can run. We know he's got that dual threat capability, so he did add nearly 40 on the ground himself, but he missed some layups. He's got to be more precise in this game if they're going to pull off the upset on the road. Iowa State's Rocco Becht on the other side. In the opener, the numbers wouldn't necessarily blow you away. He was just 14 of 28 for 183, but he did have 3 touchdowns, 1 on the ground. And with the game on the line, he delivered maybe the most important play of the game. That was the completion there to the left-hand side to Carson Hansen on 4th and 3 that secured the victory. And then last week against South Dakota, he set a program record for completion percentage. He hit 19 of 20 for 278 and 3 touchdowns. So here's hoping he can carry over some of the performance from the last 2 weeks into what should be an incredible game. Question number 1, can Iowa control the line of scrimmage offensively? They have a really good offensive line, and we've known that now for a while. This has always been a legitimate strength of Iowa's team. They really imposed their will on the ground last week. They went for 310 on the ground. That's the most in a season opener since 2002. They controlled it all the way through, averaging nearly 6 yards per carry and dominating time of possession. If you look at their weaponry at running back, they have a lot of guys that you could really like. Now, Xavier Williams, who had a breakout performance. That was his college debut. He's a redshirt freshman. He's the first Iowa freshman to break over 100 yards in his debut since Sean Green 20 years ago. He went for 122 and a touchdown on just 11 carries. So he's got some speed. He's got some power. It's a pretty lethal combination. And if they can kind of control the clock, shrink the game, Iowa held the ball for over 36 minutes last week. That would go a long way in allowing them to continue their mentality of playing very, very complimentary. For Iowa State, the plan's pretty simple. Sell out against the run. You force a struggling quarterback that is new in this place into obvious passing situations. Now, Iowa State's run defense, kind of a liability in 24. They were 98th in the country in rushing yards allowed per game. However, against Kansas State a couple weeks ago, their first real test and first barometer of whether or not they've grown in that area, they gave up just 110 on the ground and punched the ball out. So I do think Iowa State's better, but will they be good enough to limit what should be a run-first style of attack from the Hawkeyes? Question 2, if Iowa's not effective running the football, can they beat you through the air? Now, we talked already about Gronowski and kind of the rhythm that they had a hard time pulling off. It almost looked like he was kind of uncomfortable in the pocket. He started by playing just 2 of his first 8. He didn't really hit anything downfield, missed some layups like I referenced. That includes a touchdown pass where he couldn't quite get enough touch on the ball. And it was a vanilla game plan, no doubt. The scheme was, for the most part, simplified, but the execution was not where it needs to be, and it's a huge step up in competition this week. Now, the wide receivers for Iowa, pretty unproven, somewhat thin. They've already kind of been hit a little hard. You got the sophomore Reese Vanderzee, who is expected to be a key contributor. He's sidelined for a month. He's got the foot injury. You also have Jarrett Bue, who is inactive for the season opener and might be out for the Cyhawk game as well. So what do they look like at wide receiver? What does the weaponry look like for Iowa? Because if they're not at 100% on the outside, that'll be hard to take some of the pressure off that rushing attack. Question 3, can Iowa State's weaponry continue to create a lot of problems? Now, we've seen 2 completely different versions of Iowa State's offense this year. Against Kansas State, it was the physical, low scoring, run heavy, avoid mistakes. That was kind of what they were. But against South Dakota, they showed that they maybe haven't taken a huge step back as far as their weapons on the outside. Shows that they have another gear to that passing attack that would be really hard for Iowa to keep up with. I love their tight ends. You got the 6'7" Benjamin Brahmer. You got Gabe Burkle, who are kind of the primary beneficiaries last week of Rocco Becht's record-setting performance. They combined for 11 receptions and all 3 of the teams receiving touchdowns. So these tight ends there for Iowa State, they could prove huge in a game like this. Question number 4, what does Phil Parker have in his bag? Because we're always curious about this. When we break down Iowa games, like, what's Phil Parker going to do? Like, as a football nerd, like, I can't wait to see. Well, we know what he's going to try to do, right? He's going to try to prevent explosive plays. He's going to make sure that his scheme is protected at all times. They're going to be really stout against the run. They're going to be super disciplined. They're going to try to force turnovers against a veteran quarterback. The pass rush, that's the key. Now, they have a really good front four. I like their ends. Llewellyn, Burkett, really good. I like some of the interior disruption that can be created by Aaron Graves. This is a group that can wreck the opponent's plan. So if they can wreck the opponent's plan, then you could be in a pretty good spot. So we'll see exactly what Phil Parker does in this game in a defensive scheme that might have to go with a bit of a pick your poison approach, because Iowa State's shown multiple ways that they can beat you this season so far. And then question 5, can Iowa State protect the home field? Now, that's probably the most fascinating intangible of this entire game. The fact that Iowa has dominated in Ames, to have won their last 6 in Jack Trice, with Iowa State's last home victory in the series coming back in 2011, it's kind of mind-blowing. I think that trend comes to an end. I'll take Iowa State. I've just seen a little more from them offensively. I trust their quarterback more. I think the veteran presence that they have across the roster is going to give them a slight advantage over the Big Ten's Hawkeyes. Baylor at SMU. SMU is a narrow 3-point favorite right now. This game will be 12 o'clock Eastern time on the CW. This is a pretty cool little rivalry, one that has not been played in nearly a decade. It'll be there at Gerald J. Ford Stadium in Dallas, Texas. Kind of a nostalgic nod to those of you that grew up watching the Southwest Conference. I watched a little bit, but I was young. But I lived in Texas long enough to know that the Southwest Conference, big-time football there for a very long time. Let's look at Baylor first. They're trying to kind of recalibrate. That week 1 loss to Auburn was really disappointing. In the offense, they were great through the air, but they weren't very good running the football. They were entirely one-dimensional, and then defensively, they gave up way too much on the ground. So they got to get that addressed. For SMU, we know they made the playoff last year. They come in the game, they dominated East Texas A&M, and we saw the Mustangs kind of showcase a really balanced offensive attack and a defense that's hoping to build on what was a breakthrough season last year. The quarterback matchup's one of the best of the entire weekend. The Baylor's Sawyer Robertson, who was prolific last week. 27 of 48, 419, 3 touchdowns, did not throw an interception, just didn't get a lot of help there with the run game going against SMU's Kevin Jennings, who was surgical, albeit against lesser competition, but he already shown some growth from where he was last year to where he could go this year. He's always had potential, but some of the fundamentals looked like they were cleaned up quite a bit against East Texas A&M. Question number 1, can Baylor find some balance offensively? Now, you look at the total yardage, 483 yards. Most people would say, all right, heck yeah, that's a win. Not often are you having 483 yards against a quality Power 4 team and losing. But if you look a little bit deeper, the fact that 87% of that total yardage came through the air, that's not good. And to account for just 64 yards on the ground and 2.7 yards per carry, that's pretty concerning when you take in the fact quarterback sacks were also an issue where they lost nearly 20 yards. Now, Bryson Washington is an amazing player, but just 14 attempts last week, 54 yards, averaging less than 4 yards per carry. That group collectively up front along the offensive line needs to be better. They have 4 starters back from a year ago. It's supposed to be a team strength. However, they did not play very well against Auburn and was pretty shocking giving up those 4 sacks and an inability to create the surge that you'd like to see from them on the ground. Question number 2, how will SMU defend these weapons? Texas State transfer Kobe Wilson was awesome last week. Clearly, he's a primary threat. Had 8 receptions for 134. But the guy that stood out maybe more than anybody was the 6'4" Michael Trigg, who has played in the SEC in the past. He creates a lot of matchup problems. He can really run. And anytime you have a tight end that can stretch the field vertically, that creates big issues for the opposition. SMU should understand that. They've had one. So 7 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown for Trigg. They're going to have to keep an eye on him. Defensive coordinator Scott Simmons for SMU does a great job. They kind of employ that bend, don't break philosophy. They did give up 351 total yards last week, but when you kind of look at it, they only led to 13 points. They forced some takeaways, a couple interceptions, and a fumble recovery. They stopped drives multiple times, even if they're giving up a little bit underneath. I would expect them to be slightly more stout. This will be a huge step up in competition for that SMU defense. Question number 3, can Baylor stop the run? Now, the biggest issue, other than the lack of balance offensively, is that Baylor could not contain Auburn's rushing attack. They gave up 307 rushing yards to Auburn on 52 carries. That's an average of 5.9 yards per attempt. And one thing that was especially disappointing is that the Auburn quarterback, Jackson Arnold, he went for 137 on the ground by himself, 2 touchdowns. And that's something that you got to be very, very aware of, because Kevin Jennings does have that ability. If things break down, he can take off. And while he's a better thrower than he is runner, he still has that playmaking ability with the ball in his hands as well. So if they don't do a better job corralling the quarterback, that could be a huge problem for Baylor as they move forward, not just in this game, but throughout the season playing against Big 12 competition. Question number 4, how banged up is SMU? Now, last week, good week 1 victory, but they lost some pieces along the way. You lose a wide receiver in Jordan Hudson, starting linebacker Alex Kilgore. Those guys get banged up, and while injuries happen and the x-rays were negative, their availability at this point is still kind of up in the air. So if those 2 guys are, for whatever reason, not available, that could be huge. If Hudson can't go, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the other receivers to step up against a Baylor secondary that's probably been told all week, like, what the heck? Let's figure it out, right? Trying to redeem themselves after a poor outing last week at Auburn. And then Kilgore's absence at the second level would be huge. He's kind of at the heart of the defense, and they would need to try to have him on the field to kind of mitigate any advantages Baylor might have in trying to create some offensive football. I'm going to take the upset here. I'm going to take the Baylor Bears. I think if you look at last week, the game was probably a little closer than you realize. They got to be better on special teams. They, of course, gave up that big return touchdown that thwarted the momentum they were trying to create. But I think Baylor has enough firepower to go into Dallas and pull off the outright upset. Ole Miss at Kentucky. Kentucky right now, about a 10-point underdog. This game is going to be 3:30 Eastern time on ABC. Love Kroger Field, man. I love going and doing games in Lexington. It's always a great environment, and I know it will be for this one as well. Since Lane Kiffin got to Ole Miss in 2020, Ole Miss and Kentucky have played 3 games that were decided by a total of 7 points. All 3 games were decided by 3 or fewer points. Kind of crazy. For whatever reason, Kentucky has matched up very well against Ole Miss the last couple of years, especially last year. For Ole Miss, you know they're searching for some revenge, right? September 28th last year, they're top 10. They have playoff hopes. They're undefeated, and they were stunned at home by a Kentucky team that kind of rocked them to sleep and then hit a big play. Now, that loss was the loss that really kept Ole Miss out of the college football playoff, and I'm sure they've thought over and over and over again about that 4th and 7 that they gave up when Kentucky's sitting there on their own 20-yard line, Stoops off to go for it, throws a streak down the left-hand side, game-winning completion, sets up the game-winning touchdown. I know this has been one that Lane Kiffin has had circled all off season to try to get some revenge after the disappointment that was last season's result. For Kentucky, they have not looked like the Kentucky of old the last couple years. What are they trying to do this offseason with a whole host of transfer players that have come in? They're just trying to regain that super physical puncher's identity. Now, they've had some challenging trends the last couple of years, right? They've lost 11 of their last SEC home games, 11 of their last 13 SEC home games. They've lost 14 of their last 17 games against power conference opponents. A second consecutive victory over Ole Miss would serve as a massive narrative flipping upset. And it would validate that 2024 win as reality, not so much the fluke. Let's look at the quarterback matchup. Ole Miss's Austin Simmons was really good in his debut, showed the poise, touch, accuracy, and the ceiling. He spread the ball really well, connected with 8 different wide receivers. He's got great command of Lane Kiffin's offense. There were 2 interceptions that kept the game maybe a little bit closer early in the game. One, I would attribute to the offensive line. The other was just a really, really bad decision. This is his first career start and his first true road test, and we know how hard it is to go on the road in college football. For Zach Calzada, Kentucky's quarterback, it's his 7th year of college football. He's on his 4th college team. It was not a great start last week. He completed just 10 of 23 for 85 yards and an interception, made some mistakes, had some inaccurate throws, also took a sack in the end zone. So there are a lot of things to clean up for Zach Calzada, but at his best, he's been really, really good. He's been kind of a giant killer in his own right. Remember, he was the quarterback in 2021 for Texas A&M that knocked off the number 1 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. That was Zach Calzada a million years ago, but it's still the same guy. Still got a strong arm, still has a lot of ability. Let's go to question number 1. Can Kentucky's defense contain the explosiveness of Ole Miss's offense? Now, Ole Miss had 695 total yards. That was more than any team in college football that played on opening weekend. And Mark Stoops and their defensive coordinator, Brad White, they've historically kind of played a very conservative style against Ole Miss. They have really been physical and have won against the line of scrimmage, and they have not allowed Ole Miss to create those explosive plays that always seem to fuel their attack. And in the 3 games that Ole Miss have played against Kentucky under Lane Kiffin, their offensive production has gone down just a little bit at a time. In 2020, they had 459 total yards. 2022, they had 399 total yards. 2024, they had 279 total yards. Now, why is Ole Miss different this year? I think it's because they actually have a potential difference maker at running back with Missouri transfer Keewan Lacey. He immediately established himself, had 108 yards and 3 touchdowns, had an explosive 42-yard touchdown run. That newfound quality at running back makes them much more balanced than they were a year ago. I love the Penn State transfer Trey Wallace, who kind of emerged as Austin Simmons' go-to guy, had 5 for 130 and a touchdown. And the tight end spot is also something you need to be very aware of because Daquan Wright and Alabama transfer Caleb Oden, they combined for 8 catches, 135 yards, and a couple scores. Question number 2, can Kentucky play keep away by running the football? In order to kind of disrupt the rhythm of the tempo offense that Lane Kiffin likes to employ, you got to keep that offense on the field, off the field. And your offense needs to stay on it so you can play great defense with your own offense. So Kentucky has to establish the run. They got to convert 3rd downs. They got to methodically move the chains and not necessarily always about scoring points. They just got to be really decisive and slow the game down, shrink the game to the point where Ole Miss might feel like they're pressing because they haven't been on the field in quite some time. In week 1, the Wildcats ran for 220 yards against Toledo. They have a really nice 1-2 punch at running back. Dante Dowdle went for 129 and a touchdown, and Seth McGowan went for 78 and a touchdown. You watch these 2 guys run, man, they run angry. Really angry. It's fun to watch those guys hit the hole because they hit it at 100 miles an hour. Now, if you look at Ole Miss's defensive front, a lot of new faces, but there's one holdover from a year ago. That's Xavier Harris. He was great last week, super disruptive against Georgia State. And granted, I understand that it's Georgia State, but anytime your stat sheet looks like this, you got to feel pretty good about what you're getting from a defensive tackle. He had 1.5 tackles for loss, a sack, 2 quarterback hurries, and an interception. So pretty good place to start. This is a remade front 7 for Ole Miss. They lost a lot of star power off last year's team, but they feel good about what they have in the front 7. They actually think they've improved in the back end defensively. Question number 3. Can Ole Miss's O-line step up to the challenge? Against Georgia State, the offensive line was really inconsistent. And the guards in particular got beat on several occasions. They allowed 6 tackles for loss and 1 sack, and that was against a team that plays in the Sun Belt. That's not going to be good enough because if you look at Kentucky's defensive line, they have some experienced players. Khalil Sanders, Josiah Hayes. They brought a high-impact transfer from David Gusta from Washington State, Myquise Humphrey-Grace. Now, you also had a couple guys that were in the rotation, like Sam Green, Steven Souls. Those guys made some game-changing plays as well. They had 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. Now, there is a critical factor in this matchup, and that's the health of Myquise Humphrey-Grace. He was the 2024 Missouri Valley Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He had an ankle injury. He's kind of listed a day-to-day. I would expect him to go, but if he can't, that could be significant for Kentucky's defensive line and the disruption they hope to cause. Question number 4. Can this revamped wide receiver core for Kentucky get going? The Kentucky wide receivers were not at all a factor in last week's game. They had just 4 catches for 12 yards. And the passing production was almost exclusively through the tight ends, Josh Caddis and Willie Rodriguez. They counted for 5 catches and 74 yards. They only had 85 passing yards overall. So they need to make sure that they spread the love and get these wide receivers involved, because it is a pretty talented group, but they just didn't get enough opportunities last week. I will not be picking this game. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough, and Molly McGrath will be with you at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Oklahoma State at Oregon. Oregon is a healthy 28.5-point favorite. There's a 3:30 Eastern Time kick on CBS from Autzen Stadium. Oregon was amazing in their debut, 59-13 dismantling of Montana State, who has been a bit of a powerhouse in the FCS for quite some time. I don't think Oklahoma State wins this game. I'm just going to start by saying that. But I'll tell you the pathway that they might need in order to make it a little interesting. Now, it doesn't help that their starting quarterback, Zane Flores, is filling in for Haas Henye, who is a TCU transfer, won the job in fall camp, was electric in his brief debut. He got hurt and has already been ruled out for the foreseeable future. He might be gone for at least 5 weeks. He had foot surgery already, and now in comes a young quarterback that's a little bit more pro style. He might be running for his life against this very aggressive Oregon defensive front. On the other side is Oregon's Dante Moore. The transition from Dylan Gabriel to him appears so far to be pretty seamless. He was a 5-star guy, 18-23 last week, 213, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and also hit 10 different receivers in the process. Question 1, will Oregon's rushing attack go wild? Their dominance on the ground last week was pretty remarkable. 253 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns. They average over 6.5 per carry. You got Noah Whittington, but it was the freshman, Jordan Davison, that was really impressive. First true freshman in program history to score 3 rushing touchdowns in a season opener. I think that's going to be a tough matchup for Oklahoma State up front defensively. Question 2, how will Oregon spread the ball around? Malik Benson got involved, the transfer from Alabama and Florida State, 5 for 51 on the score. I'd still think, though, the biggest challenge in defending this weaponry from Oregon is Kenyon Sadiq. 6'3", 245. We've seen him hit speeds of near 22 miles an hour on the GPS tracking. I don't know how you match up with this guy. He's too fast for linebackers and too big for safeties, and you absolutely don't want to cover him with a corner. I think he's one of the best pound-for-pound players in the country and might be one of the biggest matchup nightmares in the country. Question 3, can Oklahoma State get anything going on the ground to take some of the pressure off their young quarterback? Against an FCS team, they averaged just 127 yards on 42 carries. It's 3 yards per attempt. Now, Caleb Hicks had 21 carries, but had just 56 yards, 2.7 yards. So you look at the offensive line, though, and they just didn't open up any holes. They have got to be better, and that's a group that 4 of their 5 starters are making a debut for the Cowboys. So that group's got to be better. Question 4, can Todd Grantham pull off a miracle with his defense? Now, the lone bright spot for Oklahoma State in their season opener was the fact that their defense was really good. Now, Todd Grantham's been around for a long time. They're fast, they're physical, he's aggressive, and they played much better on that side of the ball in game 1 than they did most of last season. They gave up just 225 yards of total offense. That was their best defensive performance since 2021, and the only touchdown that the Skyhawks scored last week came on a double pass trick play. Wendell Gregory's a guy to keep an eye on, outside linebacker. Looked really good as a pass rusher, had 3 sacks in the first half by itself. Question 5, the only way Oklahoma State, I think, can win this game is if they force a lot of mistakes. Now, the great equalizer when there's a big mismatch, turnovers. For a massive underdog like Oklahoma State to have any chance of pulling it off, man, they have got to have +2, maybe +3 in the turnover battle. If these two teams keep a clean sheet, it will not be competitive. But if the Cowboys can somehow generate multiple takeaways, creating a short field, maybe putting some pressure on Oregon, then things can look a little bit different. Positive turnover margin, absolutely vital for Oklahoma State to make this thing very competitive. They've lost 9 straight games against FBS opponents. That's their longest streak since 1994 and 1995. I'll take Oregon. I'll lay the points. I just don't know how Oklahoma State's going to muster enough offense to make this thing competitive. A game that should be outstanding this weekend. Kansas at Missouri. Missouri is currently a 5.5, 6.5 point favorite, kind of varying all over the place. This game's 3:30 Eastern time on ESPN2 from Faurot Field. It's a rivalry that's been dormant for 14 years. The border war is back, folks. Kansas's Lance Leipold in year number 5 with the new offensive and defensive coordinator. Jim Zabrowski's there on offense. DK McDonald's there on defense. Missouri's Eli Drinkwitz has Kirby Moore as their OC and DC Corey Batoon, who brings back 9 starters from what they did a year ago. The quarterback matchup's one of the best of the entire weekend. Now, not a lot of people are talking about it, but we will here because we love college ball, and we're going to dive in to college ball. Kansas's Jalen Daniels, 6th-year veteran, team captain, super elite athleticism, 6 foot, 220. He can become a punishing runner if he needs to be. Through 2 games, he's been off the charts good. 7 touchdowns through the year, adding 65 yards on the ground. He is a bit streaky, but when he's on, he is on. He has had some turnover issues in the past too. He threw 12 picks in 2024. That was the most in the Big 12. So he's got to be smart in this game against what should be a very good Missouri defense. On the other side, it's Missouri's Bo Pribula, transfer from Penn State. His role as a Nittany Lion was kind of a run-first, change of pace, package player, and it was kind of specialized and formulated. He was a very effective runner last week. We knew he had that ability. That was not surprising. But to see how efficient he was as a thrower, we completed 23 of 28 for 283 and a couple touchdowns. That's the area that I wanted to see, and the throws were on the money for most of the evening. Question 1. Can Missouri's rushing attack pound it? Now, Mizzou's offensive line has been retooled. A lot of new faces, 4 transfers coming in. Thought they played pretty well in their debut. They did give up a sack, but they ran for 219. I love their running back, Ahmad Hardy. Was the Sun Belt Conference Freshman of the Year, went for over 1,300 yards last season. He opened his career with a 100-yard performance at Mizzou. And you also have to account for Bo Pribula's legs too, because he's a willing and powerful runner, had a couple touchdowns on the ground in his debut. Kansas on the defensive line has actually been quite disruptive. They got 6 sacks in 2 games. That's the second most in the country. Their most glaring weakness, however, is at linebacker. They've got a lot of injuries that they're currently dealing with. Bengali Kamara, that was their highest rated transfer, supposed to be the starter at will linebacker, non-contact knee injury in practice, expected to miss a couple weeks. He's not even on the depth chart as of this moment. Joseph Sipp, a transfer from Bowling Green, was supposed to be the middle linebacker. He's also been out with an injury and is no longer on the depth chart at this moment. And then Jason Gilliam, a returning starter, is kind of that hawk linebacker position, missed the first couple games. We're still wondering whether or not he's going to be available in this one. So if they are down at linebacker, that could be a huge problem against a very efficient rushing attack for the Missouri Tigers. Question 2, how explosive can Kansas's rushing attack be? Now, Kansas's offense kind of hinges on their ability to create a lot of problems outside the tackles. They've averaged 246 yards a game on the ground. I love their explosiveness that they have at running back. Running back Daniel Highshaw has been fantastic. 158, running for a nearly 5.9 plus per carry. And then you also have the return of fellow running back LaShawn Williams, expected to be available after injury. That should be a pretty significant boost to the 1-2 punch that they have at their disposal. Now, Missouri's front 7, that's the heart of the defense. They got 9 starters back from last year, but they held their first opponent to under 4 yards per carry. They're going to have to play even better in this game. They're an aggressive group, so if they over pursue or play out of a gap, that's when Highshaw and Williams can really hurt you. So can the explosiveness be there in the run game for the Kansas Jayhawks? Question 3, Can Kansas be better in critical situations? Now, they have not been great so far on third down. Their conversion is just 30%. That's near the bottom in all of college football. That's tied for 101. So they have got to be better on third down to extend drives. And in order to do that, they're going to need to be targeting their go-to players in the wide receiver core. Alabama transfer Emmanuel Henderson is going to be going against a veteran secondary that's played a lot of football, but he's quickly become a go-to guy. He's got top-end speed that's big time. He's already caught 9 passes for 154 and a couple scores this year. This also includes the red zone too, by the way. So Kansas is going to need to be really good in the red zone because Missouri was perfect 4 for 4 in the red zone. All 4 of those red zone penetrations resulted in touchdowns. So Kansas, I think, has to win situationally on third down and in the red zone. Question 4, will Mizzou be able to manufacture big plays? Their explosive deep threat, Marquise Johnson, has averaged about 27 yards per catch in week 1. That will challenge a completely rebuilt Kansas secondary that's still trying to kind of find their footing under a new defensive coordinator and scheme. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. And then question 5, will Jalen Daniels be able to play hero ball? Everything I just listed is fine, right? All those questions are significant. But arguably the most significant question in this game is if Jalen Daniels is the Jalen Daniels he's capable of being. High level, top 10, top 5 quarterback in college football. He can absolutely be that. He's been that before. If he can elevate his play to a point in which there are no answers, then look out, man. Look out. He is that good. He is that dynamic, and he can be that big of a problem in what could be a game that goes down to the wire. And in a game in which the quarterback single-handedly wins it, the guy with the higher ceiling is Jalen Daniels. So if he plays the way he's capable of playing, look out. I don't think he will, not in this game. Missouri is too good defensively, and Kansas has too many question marks on the defensive side of the football. I think Mizzou will run it. I think they'll have success. I think they'll win this game in pretty remarkable fashion, double digits thereabouts, maybe 10 thereabouts. I like Mizzou to hold serve at home against the Jayhawks. We'll go next to Arizona State at Mississippi State. This game's 7:30 Eastern time on ESPN2. Arizona State right now about a 6.5 point favorite, right around there. They are the reigning Big 12 champs. They are about to have their first true test, and we're going to see exactly where they're at. And the Bulldogs, they're trying to avenge a game that was pretty close last year. They lost 30-23 in Tempe. They're trying to show some tangible results under second-year head coach Jeff Lebby. A win over a ranked playoff contender would validate a lot of what Jeff Lebby has preached all offseason, is that they have improved across the board and they're a lot better defensively. They believe they are. We'll find out in this game because they're going against a great quarterback in Arizona State's Sam Levitt. In the season opener, he was awesome. Had 4 touchdowns, was 25 of 39, 257, couple scores through the year. But his most impactful plays might have come on the ground. He ran 7 times for 73 yards. He led the team with 73 yards and a couple touchdowns. He also had that big 52-yard run that resulted in a score. On the other side is Mississippi State's Blake Shapen. When he's healthy, he's been very, very good. He's healthy. So can he elevate his performance to kind of carry the Bulldogs to what would be an unexpected victory? Question 1, can the Bulldogs get the run game going? Now, in the first half against Southern Miss, there were a lot of mistakes. And then everything kind of fell into place for Mississippi State, and you started to see them pull away against Southern Miss. They have a really nice duo in Davin Booth and South Alabama transfer Fluff Bothwell. That's a really nice combination. They had 3 second-half touchdowns. They led the team to 188 rushing yards. They averaged over 4.5 yards a carry. Now, the performance of the offensive line, this is a group that has undergone a complete overhaul, a complete reconstruction. They struggled a little bit, and I think they're going to need to be better because Blake Shapen was strip sacked on one play due to immediate pressure. They allowed 4 tackles for loss against a non-Power 4 opponent, so they're going to have to be better up front against a Sun Devils defense that relies a lot on athleticism, creates a lot of chaos, has a bunch of variety with their blitz packages. Question 2, how will Mississippi State contain Sam Levitt? In last year's game, Sam Levitt had his worst performance of the entire season, completed just 10 of 20 for 69 yards. They forced him to rely kind of on his legs, and he did. He did a good job with that. But Mississippi State defensive coordinator Coleman Hutzler will undoubtedly look to last year's recipe and try to implement the exact same thing. They used a spy, I would think, in passing downs. That's going to require being very disciplined with their pass rush because scrambling is what makes Leavitt extremely dangerous. There's a huge question mark right now that looms over Mississippi State's secondary. If you look at their cornerback position, that might be their biggest hole on the roster. So we'll see if they're up to the challenge because there's a couple good wideouts that they're going to have to go up against. Question number 3. Has Mississippi State's defense taken the step needed? They were historically bad last year. They ranked at or near the bottom of the FBS in scoring defense, total defense, rushing defense, you name it. They gave up 1 million yards and 1 million points. They got to be better. And Coleman Hutzler, he's got a big overhaul that he's going to have to deal with. If you look, though, at the first game against Southern Miss, there was a lot of improvement. But the biggest improvement came with how they defended the run. Now, Southern Miss wants to run the football. That's what they are. They held them to under 3 yards per carry. That's a really good starting point, but how will it work against better competition now with a legit playoff contender in Arizona State? Question 4. Can Arizona State get some receiving production from someone other than Jordan Tyson? Now, last week, he was targeted over and over and over again. He caught 12 for 141 and 2 touchdowns. Now, he's probably going to be a first-round pick at some point. He is super dynamic. He's great after the catch. He is a legit bona fide number 1 wide receiver. But if you look at where everything else is beyond Tyson, the passing attack really runs through Tyson almost exclusively. Their starting slot receiver, Jalen Moss, he's uncertain. He left the opener with a foot injury. There's not really another proven, super consistent threat within this wide receiver core. That provides Mississippi State with a pretty obvious game plan. Do you bracket Tyson the entire game? Because if you bracket Tyson, it means you got a corner underneath, a safety over the top. That means the other guys are on islands. So can Malik McClain, can Xavier Guillory win their one-on-one matchups against a question mark for the Mississippi State Bulldogs, or can they run the ball? Because running the ball with a bracketed receiver becomes very, very difficult. It becomes very, very easy if the numbers are not good up front. Question number 5. Can the road environment lead to a continued lack of discipline from Arizona State? Last week, they committed 12 penalties for 93 yards in a sequence there that is unlike many I've seen before, to have a 75-yard touchdown wiped out, and then on the very next play have a 60-yard reception wiped out because of the penalty. That's a hard thing to think about. It's a scheme that's built on tempo, rhythm, explosive plays, and they're going into one of the more hostile environments in college football with Davis-Wade Stadium. The constant clang of the cowbell, the pre-snap challenges, procedural challenges of playing in that environment are real. Take it from me. I've played there. That place is a beast to communicate in. Now, ironically, the Bulldogs, they weren't very disciplined themselves. They got flagged 14 times for 119 yards against Southern Miss. So Coach Levy and quarterback Blake Shapen, they said that these self-inflicted mistakes, they cannot raise their ugly head against a talented Arizona State team, because it's going to disrupt the rhythm and it's going to disrupt sustaining drives there in the first half of this football game. I will take Arizona State in this game, but it will be close. If you read between the lines there, you're thinking about maybe placing a wager or something, I'll take Arizona State, but it'll be close in what should be a good one there in Starkville. Now, the game of the weekend is Michigan at Oklahoma. Oklahoma currently about a 5.5-point favorite. This game is 7:30 Eastern time on ABC Stadium from Memorial Stadium. Now, Michigan, really good finish of the season last year, right? Finished strong, beat Ohio State, beat Alabama. This is the first test of Sharon Moore's second season as the head coach, and an opportunity to kind of show that this is the type of recipe that could go on the road into a hostile environment and have no challenges whatsoever. Ironically, this is where Coach Moore played. He's an Oklahoma alumnus, played along the offensive line for legendary head coach Bob Stoops. Michigan, for Brent Venables, this is probably the biggest game of his tenure. Now, they made tremendous progress this offseason. They created a lot of momentum. this offseason by going out and hiring a new offensive coordinator in Ben Arbuckle. We know they're super dynamic. We know they have a great passing attack. In their debut, they shattered a bunch of records. There's a lot to be excited about. But if they don't play well offensively, that would be a huge step back as far as the narrative is concerned for Brent Venables and this new look offense for the Sooners. The quarterback matchup's a fantastic one. Michigan's Bryce Underwood. This will be his first true road test. And as we learned last week with Arch Manning and several others making their first start on the road, going on the road as a young player is very difficult. But if you look at what he did in the debut, it was awesome, man. I thought he showcased a certain level of poise and maturity. It was pretty obvious why he was one of the top players in the country coming out of high school. 21 of 31, 251 and a touchdown. Throwing the ball before guys are getting out of their break, being accurate, buying a little time, playing some touch, tight ends out of the backfield and little wheel routes. He did a lot of really nice things in the debut. This will be a whole other animal, especially if for whatever reason Michigan does not get off to a hot start, because Oklahoma is feeling it behind the energy that their quarterback brings. That's John Mateer. Super surgical in that first game. 30 of 37, 392, 3 touchdowns. Broke the Oklahoma program record for passing yards in a debut. That mark was previously held by Heisman Trophy winner Baker Mayfield. He's got unbelievable command of the offense. He was with Ben Arbuckle at Washington State. He should be in complete control. He also showed last week how good a runner he is as well. He is a fantastic football player and will be a lot of fun to watch, not just in this game, but throughout the rest of the season. Question number 1. How will the Sooners hold up against the run? We know the game plan for Michigan, right? You got a young quarterback. What's the process that you want if you want to take some of the pressure off your young quarterback? Well, utilize a powerful and dynamic rushing attack. Create really favorable down and distance situations. 2nd and 4s, 2nd and 3s, 2nd and 1s. That's ideal. That's the perfect plan. And I think if you look at their week 1 game, one of the highlights was Alabama transfer running back Justice Haynes. From the opening drive, you can see he's going to be a featured player. 56-yard touchdown run that immediately kind of established his place as the guy in the backfield for the Michigan Wolverines. Finished with 16 for 159 and 3 touchdowns. Now, Brent Venables, he's a master at designing and implementing run-stopping schemes. That includes getting safeties in the box, utilizing kind of a high-risk, high-reward approach. Will they move, but they'll move in unison. The primary objective has to be completely sell out against Justice Haynes and company, limit the ground game, and get Michigan off schedule. If they consistently stop the run on 1st and 2nd down with a loaded box, that puts a lot of pressure on the young quarterback, Bryce Underwood. Question 2, will John Mateer deliver on the sport's biggest stage? Now, I happen to think he will. I've seen enough from John Mateer at Washington State to know that I think his game translates. I've just watched him. I've seen how he creates. I've seen how dynamic he is. He's just a playmaker. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. He'll run around, he'll create, he'll threaten the line of scrimmage. You'll think he's running, and then last second, he'll throw it underhand or sidearm right around the defender into the perfectly awaiting arms of one of his weapons on the outside. But a lot of people think that John Mateer just torched bad competition. That might be true, but we'll find out. In week 1, wasn't high-level competition for John Mateer, and he torched him. All throughout last season, he didn't play against the best the sport had available to him. But guess what? He looked pretty dang good in the process. Now he's playing against a defense that has everyone's respect. Will his production live up to the expectations that he has coming into the season? Question number 3, which weapons will be the priority for Michigan? Now, one thing with young quarterbacks that I absolutely love, that's having a really good room at tight end. I happen to think Michigan's tight end room among the best in the sport. Martin Klein, leading receiver last week, 6 receptions for 93 yards and a touchdown. And they might get an additional boost with the expected return of sophomore tight end Hogan Hansen, who's listed as probable going into this week. So that is encouraging as well. I want to see exactly what the distribution chart looks like for Bryce Underwood. Because if it were me, I would lean heavily on the run game. I would lean heavily off play action, and I would utilize those tight ends as much as I possibly can. You're going to see some man, you're going to see some zone, you're going to see a variety of coverages. Those tight ends can be a problem against whatever coverage Brent Venables decides to employ. Those tight ends could be huge in this game for the Michigan Wolverines. Question 4, can the Sooners establish a great pass rush? Now, the defensive line, they have some possible breakout stars. And if you look kind of across the board, whether it's on the interior or on the edge, I think this could be the best and most disruptive defensive line in the entire SEC. They have depth at defensive tackle. They can go 5 deep there. They have some speed off the edge, including edge rusher R. Mason Thomas. There's a few other guys that are just waiting for that opportunity to break out against top-tier competition. This might be that opportunity. So can the Sooners pass rush step to the forefront? Question 5, can Michigan limit the explosive plays? If you look at John Mateer, he's a gunslinger now. Like, he wants to create big plays, and he's got 3 key targets on the outside. The transfer receiver Keontez Lewis was great, had 9 for 119 and a couple touchdowns last year. Jared Koenig, a converted linebacker making his debut at tight end, looks like he can be a bit of a mismatch. He had 5 for 90. And then we've all heard for a while now about Deion Burks, who is going to be reliable as kind of a chain mover, can play out of the slot, but does possess game-breaking speed if he gets behind the defense. He had 7 for 188 in the score last week. They're going against a Michigan secondary that could be without their best player, Rod Moore. And in his absence, the onus will kind of fall on the other safeties, Metcalf, Hillman, to kind of communicate effectively on the road and to prevent coverage bust that did happen occasionally against New Mexico. And then question 6, maybe the biggest question in the game. How will the Sooners' offensive line hold up? This might be the biggest question mark hanging over the Oklahoma offense this year, is that performance of the offensive line. It was a big liability last year. They gave up nearly 4 sacks a game. There's a lot of optimism in the offseason about a possible breakthrough by that position group. They got a bunch of key transfers. But if you look at game number 1, they weren't consistent running the football. They weren't consistent in pass pro. That group now takes a massive step up in the level of competition they're going to see this week, because you know Wink Martindale, this defensive coordinator, very aggressive. They're going to create pressure. They're going to force turnovers. They're going to blitz you. We know the identity of this defense lies, and has for a long time, on their front 4. They have elite edge rushers in Moore and Guy. It's a tandem that can make a claim for sure as one of the best edge rushing duos in the country, but do not overlook those guys on the interior as well. Rayshawn Benny and Damon Payne, the transfer from Alabama, they're going to be controlling the line of scrimmage. And if they can stop the run and apply pressure on the pass, that will be very, very difficult. One other note too, starting linebacker Jayshon Barnum for Michigan, he's excellent there at the second level. He suspended the first half due to that targeting penalty occurred last week. So got to be careful in the first half, knowing his absence. And I would think Oklahoma will step on the gas in this first half to try to challenge those linebackers to communicate as fast as humanly possible. Now, Michigan might have deeper and more talented roster on paper. I think there are some situational factors at play, though. True freshman, first start on the road, absence of a couple key pieces on the defensive side, a really potent offense, and a game that Brent Venables absolutely has to have. I'll take Michigan. I'll take Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma will take care of business. I think they have an emphatic victory. I think they win the game. I think they covered the spread. And I think they get it done for Brent Venables in a game that he absolutely has to have. Now, I'm going to give you one thing to focus on against weaker competition this week for a handful of schools, okay? These teams should not be in jeopardy of losing the game this week. If they are, then something's probably gone wrong. But this is something that you should watch for, because it's been an issue, at least dating back to last year in some cases, or maybe it presented itself in week 1. We'll start with the Texas Longhorns. I want to see them be better in the red zone and in short yardage offense. Okay, they could not get the ball into the end zone consistently last year. They didn't do it again this season. They failed on critical 4th down situations. They were stuffed at the 1-yard line there in the 3rd quarter. For a team that wants to win a national championship, they have to be able to convert short yardage. They have to be better in the red zone. For Penn State, I want to see better efficiency running the ball between the tackles. Their rushing attack last week was not elite. Yes, they won convincingly against Nevada, but that was in large part due to the passing attack led by Drew Aller. But Nicholas Singleton, Katrin Allen, they had just 62 yards on 16 carries. I want to reestablish that dominance on the ground game. That'll be the focus for me when watching Penn State this weekend. The Florida Gators, I want to watch their offensive line and pass protection. Yes, they were completely dominant against LIU, but the offensive line was not elite. DJ Lagway coming back from an injury. He looked a little bit rushed. Maybe he held on the ball a little long a couple times. Pass protection needs to be shored up just a little bit, and that was against lesser competition. It's a veteran offensive line that needs to provide a clean pocket for a quarterback that has at times had a couple injury questions. The Georgia Bulldogs, I want to see them get off to a little better start. First half, the passing game and the protection, it wasn't great. There were a lot of things about this win over Marshall that was fantastic. But some of the pass protection there in the first half kind of disrupted the rhythm of the passing game. It found its footing as things went along. This is a national championship contender. I just want to see them start and dominate from start to finish along both lines of scrimmage. The South Carolina Gamecocks, it's kind of the offensive consistency, maybe some play calling. I also think the offensive line needs to be a lot better as well. That the offense had some flashes of brilliance against Virginia Tech in their win last week, but they didn't do a great job, I don't think, protecting Lenora Sellers. There were some run-throughs. They were inconsistent getting push in the run game. That's something they need to figure out and figure it out quickly because it'll get tough here for South Carolina if they're not better up front along the offensive line. For Alabama, it's stopping the run and being physical on defense. They lost 31-17 to Florida State. Not great, right? But they kind of got dominant along the lines of scrimmage. Seminoles went for 230 on the ground. They gave up 4.5 a carry. Florida State's offensive line, they consistently won at the point of attack too. A lot of explosive plays, including that 32-yard touchdown run. They also didn't do a great job tackling in space. It's a defense that has always been built with a defensive identity. Reestablishing physicality, taking firm control of the line of scrimmage against lesser competition is a great step in the right direction for the Tide this weekend. For Texas A&M, it's the run defense. Against UTSA, they couldn't really stop the run. They gave up over 200 yards on the ground. UTSA running back Robert Henry went for 177, including a 75-yard touchdown run. So that was a little bit of a concern coming out of that first game. And I think if you listen to Mike Elko, they said that a couple of the explosive runs were correctable, which is good because this is going to be an elite group and they're going to backfill some of the guys that left off last year's team. That front seven has to be excellent. For Texas Tech, it's being clean on special teams. Yes, they routed Arkansas Pine Bluff. And it's hard to find a lot of issues there. This team has real college football playoff implications. You can't muff a punt. You can't have penalties on kickoff returns. So clean up a few things in special teams. That should be very helpful as the Red Raiders continue their path towards hopefully punching their ticket to the college football playoff. We always do this every Thursday. I give you some giant killers. Okay? Some teams that I might back against the spread. I might take the points. I might even think about an occasional money line play on some of these teams, okay? I'm not picking outright upsets, but these are teams that I'd be watching very closely this weekend because I think these underdogs have a legitimate chance to pull off the outright upset. We'll go Baylor, +3 against SMU. I think Baylor kind of needs this one. And SMU, I don't know why that line's 3. It feels like the SMU should be favored by more, which makes you think Baylor is going to make this thing very interesting. I'll look at Duke. 3-point dog against Illinois at home. Duke's got a lot of explosiveness. They got a lot of firepower. They're very disruptive along the defensive front. I think they can battle and make things very interesting in this one. Arkansas State is a 23.5-point dog at Arkansas. Arkansas, watching their offensive line, there were some things I did not like what I saw last week. I think Arkansas State will play hard. I think Arkansas State will give them all they want. I think Arkansas State could make that game a little bit interesting there, and I would definitely take the points with 23.5 in my pocket. I look at Mississippi State catching 7 thereabouts against Arizona State at home. I think Arizona State is going to struggle to communicate in this game. I think if you talk to people that are associated with Arizona State's program, this is a game that concerns them. This, however, for Mississippi State, massive opportunity for Jeff Levy. They have nothing to lose in this game. Go throw a punch. I think they will. I think they'll make this game very, very close against the Arizona State Sun Devils. And then UNLV, they're a 2.5-point dog against UCLA. I think UNLV wins the game. I saw a lot of flaws last week from the UCLA Bruins. I think UNLV under Dan Mullen, they're just getting started. This team will get better and better and better. They got 2 games under their belt. They look much better from week 1 to week 2. I think they'll look even better from week 3 to week 4. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Like always, we encourage you to go subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, review the podcast on the podcast platform of your choosing. And then you can always also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So for all of us here at ACF, we really appreciate you guys being with us. Enjoy the games this weekend, and let's have some fun watching a whole fantastic weekend of college football. But for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack intern, Sam, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.